So the Social Security creates three programs. The first, this old age insurance program, which is run by the federal government and not overtly discriminatory. And then two other programs, which are not overtly discriminatory, but are set up in a way that allowed them to be discriminatory. These were unemployment insurance and a program that sent assistance to single mothers. And those two programs would be run by the state government. The federal government sends money to the states, and then the states run the program themselves. And it was Southern Democrats who insisted that it be written that way. Because then, in Southern states, they can use the local control of the program to ensure that it's more difficult for black people to get benefits, and in some cases, almost impossible. But nevertheless, the fact that this program, the old age insurance, did not turn out the way Southern Democrats wanted it, it's not overtly discriminatory at all, was a setback for Democrats in the South. And the WPA, a program created here in the same time period by FDR's administration, this was a massive government jobs program. The WPA was the Works Progress Administration, but it put Americans to work, building roads and bridges, the country's infrastructure. And it was run by Harry Hopkins, who was a member of the NAACP. And it was run in a way that was far less discriminatory than anything from the first years of FDR's administration. Part of the WPA was a program to employ the out-of-work actors and artists and musicians all across the country. And even here, there was a Negro unit which put to work some of those unemployed writers and actors and artists, some of them folks we talked about back in the Harlem Renaissance. And a final really big development to come out of the Great Depression here is that black people really, in a major way, enter the labor movement. You may remember weeks ago we talked about the United Mine Workers, that union that sort of bucked the national trend of excluding black people completely. Well, here during the Great Depression, the guy you see as a griffin or something over here, John Lewis, he was now the head of the United Mine Workers. And the United Mine Workers took a small group of rebellious unions who really had the crazy idea that all workers should stand together, regardless of the kind of work that they did, or their sex, or their color. So John Lewis took his union, a small group of other unions, and created a new umbrella group called the CIO. And the CIO now set out to organize workers regardless of their differences. And this was a major difference than the unions that had come before. Now, part of what makes the CIO possible here is that the laws had changed during the Great Depression, and unions were now legal. Workers had legal protections to form unions, to strike, to boycott and picket. And so, led by John Lewis, the CIO set out to organize everybody who works for an industry. And to do it, John Lewis relied heavily on communist field organizers because they were good at their job. They were good at getting people to overlook their differences and stand together. Lewis was smart enough to bring black people into leadership positions right away, because he knew that black workers were justifiably skeptical of unions telling them to stand together with white workers, They've heard this before, and white workers have always betrayed them at the first chance. So having black people in leadership positions helped alleviate that problem. And black workers began joining the CIO. By 1940, there were 200,000 black workers in CIO unions. This is going to be transformative for these 200,000 black people and their families. Being in the CIO is going to allow them to move into the middle class. And this gives them the means to care more about protesting or joining the NAACP. And it's in this context that the BSCP finally win victory. Remember, A. Philip Randolph had been struggling for this for years, and now they finally win it. Now, those BSCP workers got their name tags, higher wages, so they're not as dependent on tips. Interracial unionism, as practiced by the CIO, ran into its greatest trouble in the South. In fact, the whole union movement had trouble penetrating the South because of white supremacy. The CIO tried to get black workers and white workers to stand together in big steel strikes in Alabama, and the steel companies managed to turn the races against each other and prevail against the unions. But this is really a new thing, and the fact that there are now 200,000 black people in these unions standing together with their white fellow workers against their employers makes it just a little bit more likely that they might talk to each other outside work, see each other as fellow Americans and human beings. So this interracial involvement in the labor movement helps lay the groundwork for interracial cooperation in other parts of society later on.